I froze.
Well, it's a frightening experience. I mean, I hate live television.
The guy asked me a question, and I thought, that's too hard a question to answer. I knew the answer, but that's going to take me 10 minutes to explain it. But I got going, and it was all right.
Yeah, it's time. Yeah, it can be a frightening experience. All these lights, and you go
of
live
course,
sometimes.
I think knowing it's not live, I think I'll be a little...
Yeah. And we edit out, and you can stop, calmer. And you can start again.
Right.
So,
okay.
We are rolling? Oh, and the sound is everything is okay. Okay, there is one thing I should explain. When I'm doing an interview, I'm like a little children. You should answer me in full sentences. Just to give you an example, if I would ask you that, how would you define empowering education? Then the answer would be, I would define empowering education or something like that. So in that way we can edit out my questions. Oh. Because I don't want to use my questions.
Oh, okay.
So it should be complete answers, full sentences. Okay. And not just referring to my question. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Oh, if I am doing this.
Sometimes you are handling it.
Okay. So it's hard for me not to. It's my Italian heritage. I'm just kidding. Okay, so we can start. Patrick, you wrote a book called Literacy with an Attitude, and at the beginning of the book you're talking about two very different types of educations. I would like you to talk about what you mean by two different types of educations.
Okay, well, there's essentially empowering education and domesticating education. Paulo Freire says that education is always either one or the other. There's, it's empowering education is the education that the higher the income of the student or their family, the more empowering the education is. And since I've written the book, I think I've come to understand something I don't think I fully understood while I was writing it, and that is that I think the real difference is that the children learn to negotiate in empowering education. Right from kindergarten, they ask the teacher why they're doing things, and the teacher explains it to them. They tell the teacher they don't want to do this, and the teacher talks to them and tells them why they either must do it or, comes to some conclusion with them. And those children learn to negotiate their entire lives. They learn they have the right to ask questions, and they don't take orders. Domesticating education is essentially education to learn how to take orders. A teacher teaching this essentially the same lesson out of the same book. You will find that in a school where there's empowering education, there is a conversation between the teacher and the children. The children ask questions. They challenge the teacher sometimes. In schools where they domesticate the children, essentially, the children has her plan or his plan, and there are no questions, and there is no negotiating. This is what you must do. This is how you must do it. Jean Anyon has this wonderful study that I talk about in the book, where they talk about, she talks about children, the teacher is what she's trying to do is get them to draw I can't think of the word, draw a figure with squares in it. A graph, I suppose, is the... Yeah. And she's explaining, now you do this, now you do that. And a little girl, this is like fourth grade, a little girl realizes what the teacher's doing. And she says, oh, I know how to do that. I know a different way of doing this. And the teacher says, do it my way or it's wrong. And that is so, that so captures what domesticating education is. Do it the teacher's way or it's wrong. So this goes, right from kindergarten, as I say, through graduate school. And as a matter of fact, there have been studies of the kind of colleges like community colleges. And this sort of thing is still going on in community colleges, where the teachers tell the students exactly, they must leave a 1-inch margin and confine what the students how they must do everything. And that is just so different in schools that are where there's empowering education. Can I go on with this, or?
Yeah, absolutely. But if you want me to ask,
no. I've got more to say about this, but I thought there's Lois Weiss was observing in a high school, and the teacher is giving the students notes, and the teacher says something like, he's talking about history of something, or United States history, and he gives them something to write. He says, write it on the second line, skip a line, write something, and then he tells them what to write on the third line. And he says something like, money is important, and then put question mark. Well, the Lois realizes that what he's saying to the children is, this question mark is supposed to imply, is money driving this whole agenda? But he doesn't tell the students what that means, and she's sure that 90% of them don't know. In the same high school, the teacher's giving them notes again. A very typical way of doing domesticating education, to read notes to the children they must copy down, sometimes on particular lines, They're giving the children. The teacher's giving the children notes on a book, and the teacher says something like, this accident or something caused the father to become an alcoholic. This terrible event, and a child raises her hand and says, "Oh, but I've heard that alcoholism is a disease, and nothing causes it. It's a disease in it." And the teacher says, "Well, that's very interesting, but we're trying to get notes for tomorrow's test." So the conversation, when the children do have very intelligent and interesting things to say, that's not what we're here for. And Anyon and others claim or have observed that what the domesticating education teaches children how to work in a factory. You do exactly you do exactly the same thing. You don't ask questions. You do it exactly the way you're told. And in more middle class, the better paying the job, the more it's a job where you do ask questions. You're being paid to ask questions. So this whole agenda of domesticating and empowering education is a way of reproducing society. People who are empowered send their children to places where they're going to get empowering education. And people who are not empowered, who are domesticated themselves, they don't really see what's wrong with the way their children are being taught. That's the way they were taught. They think that's what school is about. So, it's a way of economic reproduction of society.
No, you mentioned that, but can you specify who is getting domesticating education in this country?
I'll go back to Jean Anyon again, who did this wonderful study. If you haven't read that, you ought to go back and read it. Her definition of working class was people below the 50th percentile in salary, family income. And I think right now that is somewhere around $46,000 a year. So a lot of people who I think probably consider themselves middle-class people are sending their children to schools for that kind of an education.
What kind?
The domesticating kind. I would suspect that, for instance, a policeman's family, policemen make at least that much, are sending their children to schools where this is kind of the rules, the way it's done. And the interesting thing is the higher you go in salary, the more this negotiation occurs. With some chagrins, considering who I am and the book that I've written, I have 2 grandchildren in very, very upscale schools. Very, very upscale. I don't think you can pay more tuition than my 2 daughters sending their boys to. And in one of the schools, when I was observing, now these are 4 and 5-year-old children, pre-kindergarten. At morning circle, what the teacher wanted to discuss with the children was the fact that the children were making rules on the playground. They were saying only boys can play on this slide and only girls can do this and only Johnny and his friends can be here. And she spent the whole 10 minutes or so saying, we don't need those rules. Why make we only have rules in this school that we need, and we talk about why we need the rules. Can anybody tell me why you need a rule that says only boys? And of course what she's saying is, you're free agents, and this is with 5-year-olds, and the kids had they talked to her about it. So I mean, you go into a kindergarten in Buffalo, for instance, and you see some really wonderful things going on. You see some really great stuff, but you do not hear the teacher say, we have too many rules here. The teacher will refer frequently to the rules. So it's just, and it starts, it's sort of like ingrained. And if you're not looking for it, you can observe in 2 classrooms and not see that's what's going on. Anion did this really brilliant study, and that she pointed out what was going on. So,
if you were to define, which is very hard in 1 or 2 sentences, what empowering education is, what would you say?
Empowering education is. It's education for powerful people. It's learning to be a powerful person. It's learning to be a person who is an agent, who understands that their opinion counts, and that knows how to express their opinion and get their way, or at least negotiate and not take orders. Children who come out of the kind of school that I've just described. They're not likely to be intimidated by, a CEO. A CEO is, somebody who's got a lot of power. They understand power. It's not like, they don't get it. They understand power very well. But they understand how powerful they are or can be. I mean, that's what they've been taught all their lives. Not only in school, but in their homes. And children who go to schools where there's domesticating education learn all their lives that the rules are there for them to follow. Now, they break the rules, but they know they're breaking the rules, and it's a whole different mindset. And those are the kind of children who are intimidated by a CEO or by a doctor even. Simply, I mean, they understand authority, and they understand the pecking order. And they don't understand that they can negotiate with people above, by and large.
Now, if you talk to teachers and educators, sometimes they would say, not necessarily in front of the camera, that trying to do the best we can, and I'm talking about those environments, inner city schools and solo economic environments. We are trying to do the best we can, but these students are just not interested in learning. And I know that you deal with this in your book too. So there's a question, is it true that they are not interested in learning?
Well, when teaching in a school where the children are poor and working class is a tough job. Teachers who say that they can't do much because the children are not interested in learning, they're not dreaming that. They're not making it up. Their experiences tell them that. But I have a couple of responses to that. One is that you can go into a school and see some real regimentation going on in one classroom and some real, copy the notes, keep your mouths closed, stay in your seat. The worst nightmare kind of domestication. And in the next classroom, you see people doing really interesting things. Now they're not, they're not the kind of interesting things you'll find out in the wealthiest suburbs. There are limits. But so one of my reactions is when the teachers say they're not interested is how much of that is really a handy excuse to not do any more than you're doing, because it is a handy excuse. I had some experience working with an organization in the poorest part of Buffalo, and their issue that they were working on was trash being dumped on their streets, dumped by trucks. When they first started, they started charging people to get rid of tires. This is 8-10 years ago. There were actually people going into this neighborhood and dumping carloads of tires, and they would call the police, and the police wouldn't come. And when they would go to the captain or complain, he would say, well, in this neighborhood, you think we're dumping trash is a big deal? We can't deal with these. I mean, it was so clearly an excuse for doing nothing. The analogy goes on in schools too. That you can cite, a teacher can. There's not a teacher alive that cannot tell you war stories about things that have gone on in their classroom that will surprise you. And if you're teaching very poor children, those stories can become quite amazing. But they can also become an excuse to do nothing. But I have to keep coming back to the fact that I taught in public schools in Chicago and the South Side. And it's a very hard job, and I was young, and I had not had the 40 years of reading and writing that I have now, and I was probably very, very strict. I was considered a very good teacher because I was, considered a strict teacher. If I could go back now, I would have lightened up a little. I would have realized that what I considered strictness and good discipline was really domesticating. And if I had that in my mind that I want to free these kids up a little, I would have done a different job. But so that's one reaction. The other reaction is that, yes, the children are not, it's not like teaching these little boys I was telling you about a few minutes ago, who are going to the school where they're negotiating with the kindergarten teacher. When they're in 5th grade and you want to talk about Egypt, they really are interested in Egypt. They might have been to Egypt. They have been to see the Tutankhamun museum displays and so on. They're ready and they're interested. I don't want to make it too, rosy. There are a lot of them who aren't, but generally speaking, the kids will go along and have some interest. In working class schools, you really will not. You'll get cooperation really from about in a classroom of 24, you're going to get cooperation most of the time from about 18 of the kids. But those other 6 who are not interested are going to cause you problems. And one of the real tragedies is that when you're dealing with those 6 hour after hour after hour, those other 18 are, copying notes from the board or something like that. And when teachers say that, I say absolutely. I feel your pain as the president.
So why is that they are not interested?
Well, they're not interested because they, really for very good reasons. They look around and they see that their parents are doing okay, or maybe they're not doing okay, but their parents' education has very little to do with how well they're doing. Their parents might have pretty low-wage jobs, but they have an aunt, who is very good in school, and she's got the same kind of low-wage job. Of course, there is the aunt who's become a school teacher and not making fantastic salary, but doing all right. But in a way, the culture does not particularly reward people who become school teachers. They, in the sense, class is a very complicated thing, and one thing, if you're, they talk about acting white as being a very dangerous thing to do if you're a black kid living in a black neighborhood. And acting white is essentially doing well in school. The culture of the children is saying, if you're going to do well in school, you're trying to act white, and we're going to shut you out. So they're an endangered species. You go into the homes, and the parents, or talk to the parents, and they might say, oh, I want my child to go to college, but watch them. Watch to see how much they really encourage their children to go to college. In my own case, I was the only child out of 9 children to go to college. And when I talked about going to college all the way through high school, my mother always acted like, oh, yes, you're going to college, and so on. But when I finished college, I got a minimum wage job in an office, and my mother didn't bat an eyelid. And 2 years later, when I said I am going to college, she began saying, well, you're 20 years old. You'll be 24 when you get on. And I went anyway. I say in the book, my mother thought I was going to become a communist and an atheist. That's why she didn't want me to go to college. So I went to college and became a communist and an atheist to prove her point. That's in the book, as I say, and a student once said to me very sincerely, are you really an atheist? I'm afraid I've forgotten what the question was.
Okay. The question is that why is it that they are not interested in education?
Why aren't they interested? Well, they're not interested, as I say, their culture does not support interest in education. It was not a very cool thing to do to admit that you'd been to a Shakespeare play in my neighborhood, or even that you had maybe watched a movie of Othello that was running on educational television. That wasn't the kind of thing that you did, or if you did, you sort of didn't talk about it a lot. What my whole book is to try to make working class people understand that what education can do for them. And the whole history of educating the working class is about educating the very first free schools. The motivation behind them was to make these children from the unwashed democracy, the unwashed population, to make them better workers. If they're literate, they'll be better workers. Make them better Christians. Make them better citizens. And that was all from the middle class and upper class point of view. Make them docile, make them obedient, make them profit, make them something that you can make more profit out of. And the working class has never gone for that. They've always seen what the game was and thought, what's in it for me? What I'm trying to show people tell people, partly in my book and partly in what I've been doing in my other activities, is to try and get working class parents to understand that they're not getting a very good deal. And in a very important way, it's their own fault. Because they're not standing up for themselves. Nobody has ever won any rights in this country and in, I guess, any country. What I know about is the history of this country. Nobody has ever won any rights by having somebody else fight for them. Blacks rose up in the 60s. It was blacks who rose up, not well-meaning whites who had always been allies of blacks. Even during slavery, blacks had white allies. But those white allies could not really carry the battle. They couldn't. It had to be the blacks that did it. The working people who formed unions, it had to be them that did it. Maybe they had allies outside that were helpful to them, but they had to do it themselves. The working class, when it comes to getting a better deal, they've got to do it for themselves. And first of all, they've got to understand that they can do it. Freire talks about it. He talks about conscientization is the term. It's the way it's translated into English. I don't know what it is in Portuguese, but Freire talks about talking to the poor people, and of course he was talking about the poor people of Brazil and in the cities of Brazil, and talking to them about their terrible condition they were in, and just getting them to see that this isn't natural. This isn't nature. Nature did not put you here. God doesn't want you, your children to be dying and for people to be hungry or people to be ill-clothed or people to be living with vermin in their houses. This is not natural. This is the way society's put together, and people put society together, and people can change the way society's put together. So he talks about conscientization, and when he talked about these things, after he talked about these, he only started teaching literacy after he talked about those things and began to say, you have the right to vote. You've already, that's already been granted. But you've got to learn to read so that you can be effective voters and effective to fight for yourselves. And that was his program. There was a right-wing takeover, and Freire was tossed out of the country. Didn't go back until he was nearly 90, I think, and died there recently. But in a way, that is exactly what I think the American working class needs. I think you need to, my wife and I have done some workshops with parents, and talked about how, not told them how bad the schools were, but did things like by showing them things that Anion found and asking them if they agreed. Do they recognize that what Anion was talking about was this school? That this domesticating education she's talking about, is she or is she not talking about your children? And they said yes, they're talking. He was talking about me. Here's a 30-year-old, 40-year-old woman saying that's exactly the way I was educated, and that's exactly the way my kids are educated. Then you can get some conversations going about how to, it's your responsibility. You don't have to take this. Of course, this causes the schools nightmares. So when we did these workshops on grant money, we always had to be a little bit we always had to stay below the radar as to that we were doing, that we were doing this, because as soon as the principal would catch on that this is what we were doing, of course, she would wisely say, I don't need this, I don't need you out there agitating my parents. But my answer to that is, I have never, ever heard a teacher in a working class school who didn't say, I would love to talk to the parents of those 5 kids, but I can't get them up here. The boy, A, will not come near the school. Well, the parents of those 5 kids might be some of the parents who say, I want school changed. If they're up there, here's the thing. What those teachers are saying is, I want them to come up here because I want to lecture them. I want to tell them what they're doing wrong, what they need to do right. And the parents know it. That's why they don't come up. They don't need another lecture. So, but if you can get parents saying, I don't like the way my kid is being educated. I want to form a committee of parents and go up and talk to the principal. The teacher is not chopped meat. She doesn't have to sit there and listen to it. She can say, oh, well, do you understand part of my problem is your child? Do you understand it's your child's behavior that's causing some of this? What I'm saying is negotiation starts. But the parents have to first feel empowered. They have to first be a little bit angry. I mean, maybe there's another way of doing it. I don't know how. I know that the history of organizing people for better rights has been the history of, first of all, getting people to understand that they're getting a bad deal and they're going to keep getting a bad deal unless they themselves do something about it. And in schools that can result in, and I've seen it result in, parents going up to the school, not to get yelled at, but to talk. And parents and teachers principals and teachers saying, you want to talk? Fine. I've got some things I want to talk. So you get a negotiation going. But until the parents see that what their children, the reason that the schools are not serving their children well is not that they're not teaching them to read and write. Kids learn to read and write in American schools. As a matter of fact, this stuff about reading scores are lower is really, demonstrably not true. Reading scores are about the same. Achievement is about the same over the last 50, 60 years. This stuff about reading scores are lower is really an attempt, I really do believe, a right-wing attempt to demolish the public schools. And they're doing a very good job of it. They really have them on the ropes.
So you were saying that the reason is not that they are not getting reading or writing skills, but...
Right. But they're being domesticated. They're being taught in school that their job is to take orders. So their lives, Mrs. Jones, your child's life is going to be just like yours, and that is that you're going to take orders, and if you get fed up, you're going to blow your top, get fired, get thrown out, get punished one way or another. But you haven't learned, and your children aren't learning, that people with a different kind of education don't wait until they're fed up and start calling people names. When they get dissatisfied, they know how to say to the boss, I'd like to talk about what's going on here.
So is that one of the main reasons they don't really participate in?
Absolutely. What the school is trying to do to them is the school has in mind a citizen, and that's an ideal citizen, say, and that ideal citizen, reads the newspaper pretty religiously. They get to work on time. They know how to do their job. They can read and write well enough to perform well in work jobs. They probably this is a step beyond, but it's what's in the teacher's head. They probably will go to the theater. They might occasionally see a Shakespeare play. They will know who John Steinbeck is and maybe have read one of his novels. This is the picture they have. And
but they don't do what?
What they do is they try and teach. That's what they're...
Yeah, but, so they do all these things, but what they are not supposed to do?
Well, the problem is that's what they're trying to teach these children, and the children see, why should I know who John Steinbeck is, whoever the hell that is? I don't know who it is. I don't want to know. I mean, but the teacher, that remains the teacher's agenda. And the teacher says there's something wrong with this child, or all 20 of them, because they don't get what my view of culture is. So it's their problem, not mine. I'm putting the notes on the board. If they don't get it, I mean, it comes down to it. So the children don't want it. What I'm trying to say is that if parents would understand that education is all about power, the classroom is the site of an enormous political struggle. It always has been, or it could be. It's not a struggle because half of the strugglers are not doing anything. They're lying down or bailing out, which is the choices working class kids have of either saying, I'll buy into your stuff. There always have been those people. I was one of them. I love that stuff about theater and stuff, but I was one of very few who felt that way. The others just, did enough not to get thrown out of school or get failed, but essentially they wanted out of there. They wanted to bail out. Some bailed out very early. So what I'm trying to say is that, and this is what Freire was trying to do in his way in a third world country, is to say that, okay, now if you understand that your children are getting domesticated instead of liberated, so to speak, you got to understand that all this stuff about Steinbeck is not irrelevant either. People who there's a very crass way of looking at it, but people can intimidate you in a negotiation by dropping a line from Shakespeare or whatever to intimidate you, to make you feel you're not as well educated. So education is a powerful tool. So you start out with, I want more of an empowering education. I want more negotiation in the class. I want my child to feel that they're not being, dumped on, being regimented. But, and this is where the negotiation comes in, now you begin to talk about the fact that middle-class people, powerful people, know this stuff. And it behooves you, if you want to get into the struggle, to know some of it yourself. So that simply so you're not just, it's no contest. When the negotiation starts, you don't have the education to deal with it. So, as I say, I've seen this begin to work, and I've seen I've never seen it. I can't say I've seen it, carried all the way through, but the idea is fairly new. The Freirean teachers, people who understand this sort of that the classroom is the site of a political struggle, and that it's essentially it's the last site in the American scene for the final equality of citizens. The classroom is where this has to be won. We have the vote. We have civil rights. We have political rights, but uneducated people don't know how to use those things in a powerful way. So it's a matter of conscientize and get them. So the children come to school, and that's why I call my book Literacy with an Attitude. They come to school not to be spoon-fed something that you're interested in teaching me, but I have no idea why. you're interested. They come to school interested. They want to learn some stuff. And maybe they don't want to hear about Shakespeare, but Steinbeck might interest them a lot. I mean, just because of, there's a great political element in what Steinbeck is talking about always, about, so all that stuff is instructive for power. It's understanding. So that's what education could become, and should become, and hopefully will become.
So am I right supposing that what you say is basically about domesticating education, that it is an intended or not intended byproduct, but nevertheless a product of this domesticating education? The people who are getting this education are not going to question the status quo of the society.
Absolutely. That in a way, the whole idea of domesticating education is about maintaining the status quo. About because it's not that working class people are docile, far from it, but the way they approach, it's like you take all you can take and then you blow your top, and that is not an effective way to use power. So working class domesticating education teaches children, and many of them learn it. Many of them are just, they do what they're told and they get by, and they, maybe get a job, pays reasonable amount of money, and they think they're doing fine, and that's, fine. And that probably is true of most of them. But it's, one thing they certainly don't learn in school is how to challenge the status quo in an effective way. And that is, as I said, that is what middle class and upper class children learn right from the start, is how to challenge authority in an effective way. Not by calling somebody a name, which is going to put you in a position of getting tossed out, but by approaching it from feeling, I have an opinion here and I have a right to express it, and I'm going to do it in a gentlemanly or ladylike fashion, but I am going to express it. And so, yeah, that is one way of looking at it, is that and of course the interesting thing about the status quo is if you're among the wealthier, more powerful classes, you want to keep the status quo. So you use your power to maintain the status quo, maybe to get something you want out of the status quo, but not to challenge the whole system, because you know how to work that system. And the children who have domesticating education don't know how to challenge the system. They don't know how to get what they want out of the system. All they really know is how to follow orders or do something that's very disempowering, like call the boss a name. So
if the system is like that, did it happen intentionally, by design, or by an accident?
No, it happened. It happened by.
I need a full sentence.
Yeah. The system got to where it is today by, it was not a conspiracy. That's a very, very counterproductive, mindset. Is that there's some conspiracy. Rockefeller and his buddies are, figuring out how to get us. They don't need how to figure it out. It's working. It's going fine, and it's going from their perspective. They don't even have to think about it. How did it get? How did this? How did it get to what it is today? There's a whole history of from the beginning of the Industrial Revolution to how the classes formed, and it's a matter of you get groups of people who are in the same position. They might not even know each other, but they're in the same. They're socially speaking, they're in the same position. I mean, maybe they're people who work in the earliest factories, and they're working in unhealthy conditions, long hours, and so on and so forth. And you get as I say, this is a huge group of people. They don't even know each other. And then you have another group of people who own these factories, and they don't know each other either. But what's in their self-interest is to get as much out of those workers as they can for as little money, and to sell their product for as much money. So those manufacturers have a common interest, even though they don't know each other. They get to know each other because they come together, and this is the way, the sort of classic theory and observation. This is the way class is formed, and those people who were working in the factories, they had common interests, and they were opposed to those interests. And you have two classes, and they begin to go at each other, there's. But it wasn't a conspiracy.
But that's in society at large. The school, one would suppose, is not like that. So it's not necessarily formed along class lines, or how is it?
Well, theoretically, it's not formed by class lines, but in fact, it is. When you when you go into before integration in this country, racial integration, people lived in neighborhoods with people like them. And I'm talking about white people. I was raised in a neighborhood that was essentially a Catholic neighborhood, but it was mostly Irish, but it was Polish, German. We were very much like each other in terms of what our fathers did, what kind of housing we had, and so on and so forth. We went, of course, to the same school. And things, they tried to maybe mix that up a little bit when they said you can't have segregated schools. So they started busing kids, essentially busing black kids into white neighborhoods. Well, I think everybody knows what happened. The whites kept moving further and further, excuse me. Before the busing, when blacks would get to a certain place, the whites would move further. But when they started busing, what happens was the middle class whites just went to a different system where they couldn't, and this is what, so today, even today, after all this effort, children are going to school with children very much like them. It's not like, this is something I used to tell my students when we talk about a study where, here's the working class school and all this stuff that I described is going on, and here's this upper middle class school where all this stuff is going on. What would happen, I would ask them, what would happen if you took the teaching faculty from this middle class school and moved them here and moved the teaching faculty there? So now you have these 30 teachers who used to be teaching working class kids. Now they're teaching in this upper class suburb. What would happen? Would these teachers who knew how to teach middle class kids go down there and suddenly turn that into a middle class school? Well, not a student in my classroom thought that would happen. They thought what would happen was those teachers who used to teach middle class children would start behaving like the teachers that used to teach these working, because they're responding to what the kids are doing. It's not like there really is a wonderful study, I think, that demonstrates this very nicely. There was a very Irish Puerto Rican neighborhood in Washington, in New York City, working class neighborhood, had long, stable neighborhood. very wealthy parents began moving in, young parents with a lot of money, began moving in. It was brownstone area of the city. And they liked the idea of living in a brownstone house really appealed to them. They began moving in, renovating houses. They call it gentrifying. So they're gentrifying this neighborhood. A lot of them were liberals who thought, I can't send my kids to a private school. I've got to send them to public school. My conscience won't let me do anything else. So they started sending their upper middle class kids to this school. And of course the parents didn't like what they saw. They didn't like the way the teachers were talking to their children. Giving them orders. Yelling at them when they didn't do what the order was. So what the parents went into the school, they started volunteering in the library. They learned who the teachers more acceptable to them were. They started leaning on the principal to have their children put in those classrooms. Then they started leaning on those teachers to get more the kind of classroom that they wanted. Pretty soon the older teacher said, I'm not putting up with these people who are up here minding my business all the time. They opted out of these classrooms. They brought new, younger teachers in. The parents brought more pressure. Pretty soon within this school, there was a little school for the children of these rich people. And they were getting the kind of education those people expected from their children. It was a progressive education, a lot of materials they were bringing. So these people essentially formed a little school within their school. And what happens actually when poor kids live in a neighborhood where they're mostly rich for one reason or another, or two neighborhoods abut each other, what happens is you get two schools. Because they say, we're doing this by ability. We're going to put the kids with the better ability in this classroom. Well, there's always a little other agenda in teachers' minds, sometimes quite explicit. They're not only talking about ability, but they're talking about attitude. So a child with high ability and a good attitude goes to the A class. A child with low ability or a bad attitude goes to the other class. And what they do is they sort on characteristics of working class and middle class people. Pretty soon all the middle class kids are in one room, and you've got two different systems going on in the same schoolroom. You get in the same classroom. My wife observed in a classroom for a year, in a first grade classroom. And the teacher, classic, wonderful, first grade teachers are the hardest working people in the world because they're teaching beginning reading, and it's hard, it's a lot of work. And it's very typical. They have three groups: the top group, the middle group, the bottom group. And they sort them originally by some sort of test score or something. But as the year goes on, if this kid is causing trouble in the top group, they put them in the bottom group where they might have 8 kids in the top group and 4 kids in the bottom group. So they put this troublemaker, they put in the bottom group because they can deal with them better in this smaller group. And what they do is, again, they sort them. They don't mean to, they don't say, I'm going to take all the poor kids and put them down there. But because they're dealing with what in their mind is, I'm looking for characteristics of good, interested students, and I'm going to put them in the A group. Well, of course, they're putting middle-class kids in because they come to school. They're the definition of the teacher's good, interested students. And the working-class kids tend to be not that definition. So in the same classroom, you get different kinds of learning. As a matter of fact, my wife observed I thought a very astute observation. The teacher would say to the first group, all right, all the A's, it's reading time. Get up to the front of the room. And they'd go up there and she'd start her lesson and everything was fine. When it was the bottom group, which was 4, 5, or 6 kids, she would say, okay, it's time for this, she was calling them blackbirds or bluebirds or something, trying to not to be judgmental by calling them ABC. That group, but she would go over and actually take them, touch them on the shoulder and say, go up to the front of the room. Her whole demeanor changed from one of, I'm doing school here with a bunch of kids, to one of, I am controlling this group of children. Actually physically, leaning over, turning their page. But it, probably totally unconscious on her part, but control became and I mean, she wasn't a crazy woman. She was responding to what the children were doing. Those children, in order to do what she wanted them to do, she had to really control them, or she felt she did. Now, this was in a community actually that was quite a wide range of people, but by and large quite wealthy. So when we're talking about the lower group there, it was not, we're not talking about people on welfare. These were probably children of firemen and plumbers, but her, she didn't say, I'm gonna empower these kids and domesticate these, but this is exactly what she was doing. Was she a vicious woman? No, she was a wonderful teacher, actually. So it's not, the blame game is not, necessarily very productive. But I still think the bottom line is that the children who are not getting good education, only their parents can do something about it. We can all be their allies, but if they're not interested, but my experience has been that if you get a group of parents together and start talking about these issues, first of all, they'll tell you, I hated school. I hated what was done to me. I think my children are getting the same thing done to them. And if you talk long enough, they start saying, well, what can I do about it? And then you can, begin to work on organizing them so they're a group who can negotiate, instead of go up and get, lectured about how terrible their children are, which is unfortunately what they think is going to happen, and they're probably right.
Okay. I usually you can stop. I usually one question is that you mentioned that you taught and later on you realized that the method you were using were not very particularly successful in order to achieve empowering education. What would be the methods with working class environment to help the kids, to empower the kids? What kind of methods would?
Well, if I were to go back to 1960 when I began teaching, I would certainly, for one thing I would do was I would pay more attention to teachers in the school that I knew were running much more progressive classrooms than I was. I would have paid more attention to what they were doing and how they were doing it. There was a woman actually across the hall from me who, and she had the same children that I did, and for good reasons or bad, because I was quite good at running a tight ship. I started having they stacked the children in 15 classes of 38th graders from 1 to 15. And I started, by the time I was there a year or two, I had the lowest scores, the children with the lowest scores. So they were a tough group of kids to teach. But this woman had the same kids. And in my classroom, children were not out of their seats a lot. Across the hall, and I'd see this. There'd be children walking around the room. They weren't doing anything vicious, as far as I could tell. my attitude was, I'm doing my thing, she's doing hers. I admired her very much, but I would have paid more attention to what she was doing to try and figure out how to do that. I aside from that, though, it's like I said, you're in a system that it's very difficult to do any to make very progressive methods work. And I think I would have I guess I would have probably gone back to the parents and tried to do more with empowering the parents. And not through the PTA, because the PTA is, I mean, it's a wonderful organization, but it's seen by middle class people as a way to, get extra magic markers into the classroom, to buy some materials and to do that sort of thing, to enrich the program a little bit by private money getting into the school. And by and large, it's seen by working class people, I think, as something that, that has nothing to do with them. My mother was never in the school that I went to for, 12 years of grade school and high school. I don't ever remember my mother coming to the school for anything. It just had nothing to do with her. So the question was, what would I do differently? I guess I am aware that the teachers and the kids are in a system that is, and it's hard to turn a system around. So I certainly would have eased up a little, and I would have tried to understand what Mrs. Kennedy was doing across the hall. I would have talked to her more, tried some of the stuff she was doing. And in that way, I think that's though probably all I could have done.
Okay. We're out of tape.
You're out of tape.
Yeah, we got like 20 seconds. We'll have to switch tapes.
Okay.